It is easy to picture this. A massive wooden horse looming silently outside the great walls of an ancient city, its wooden belly concealing warriors inside, armed to the brim in the dark. For over 3 millennia, that image has captivated us, one of history's greatest symbols of cunning and deceit. But what's the question that has tormented archaeologists, historians, and storytellers for centuries? Did the legendary siege of Troy ever happen? Was there a 10-year war fought over beautiful Helen? Did Achilles drag around the body of Hector? Tonight, we're diving headfirst into one of the greatest mysteries in history, peeling away the myth and legend to find out what happened when the world of the Bronze Age blew apart in war at the intersection of Europe and Asia. In order to understand Troy, we must first travel back in time to the late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE, when the Mediterranean world was an embroidered tapestry of powerful civilizations. Mycenaeans ruled much of the Aegean Sea, their bronze-armored men and towering citadels commanding overland trade across Spain to the Black Sea. Meanwhile, Hittite Empire possessed vast territories in areas today known as Turkey, with its capital at Hattusa, comparable to any city in the ancient world. Between them, there existed a strategic city that dominated the mouth of the Dardanelles, the slender pass between the Mediterranean and the productive trading grounds of the Black Sea. The city, Wilusa to the Hittites and Ilios or Troy to the Greeks, was a jewel on the crossroads of continents. Archaeological information shows that Troy 6, the sixth major settlement on the site, was a prosperous Bronze Age city with tremendous walls, giant walls, and evident marks of wealth and global trade connections. The battleground was laid out, not for the sake of a beautiful queen, but over something far more valuable: control over one of the globe's most vital trade routes. 400 years afterward, a blind poet by the name of Homer sewed together ancient oral stories into two of the greatest literary masterpieces of all time, the Iliad and the Odyssey. His Troy was not a city but an icon of divine vengeance, hero's honor, and the tragic cost of pride. Homer's narrative unfolds like a divine tragedy. Paris, the prince of Troy, abducts Helen from her husband Menelaus, king of Sparta. The Greeks assemble 1,000 ships under the command of Agamemnon, sailing across the wine-dark sea to attack the impregnable walls of Troy. For a decade and more, heroes struggle in the gods' watchful eyes. Achilles, fleet-footed and awful with wrath; Hector, Trojan champion of noble birth; Odysseus, wily beyond estimate. The poem pulses with superhuman moments, gods walking among mortals, divine intervention, warriors accomplishing impossibly tremendous feats. But under the mythological veneer, Homer provides us with remarkably detailed knowledge of Bronze Age warfare, politics, and material culture that historians now recognize as unexpectedly accurate. The question is, how much of Homer's epic contains actual historical memory, and how much is creative invention? The search for the ancient Troy of today begins with German merchant Heinrich Schliemann, whose childhood dreams were harassed by Homer's words. In 1870, convinced that the Iliad was based on real events, Schliemann began to dig at Hisarlik, a tell in northwestern Turkey where local law placed Troy. His initial methods were crude. He dynamited his way through levels of ancient cities to reach what he believed to be Priam's treasure, destroying valuable evidence along the way. What Schliemann did find was more and less than he anticipated. Not one Troy, but 9 consecutive cities built one atop another across millennia. The treasure that he ascribed to King Priam was of earlier date, around 2500 BCE. But Schliemann's work, in spite of all the shortcomings, proved that Hisarlik had been a considerable Bronze Age town. Subsequent excavations by more careful archaeologists like Wilhelm Dorpfeld and Karl Blegen revealed a sophisticated city with magnificent walls, huge buildings that were perhaps palaces, and unmistakable evidence of violent destruction around 1180 BCE, precisely the date Homer's war was said to have occurred. Modern archaeology revealed 2 potential candidates for Homer's Troy, each providing a different explanation for the city's fall. Troy 6, occupied from 1700 to 1250 BCE, were the most magnificent of the settlements on the site, a wealthier, more heavily fortified city with gigantic walls of stone up to 5 meters thick and towering gates which inspire, or today, its pottery attest to contacts across the Aegean world, and horse bones a prominence of chariot warfare and cavalry described so lavishly by Homer. Yet it was not conquest or siege that marked the end of Troy 6, but a devastating earthquake that shattered its walls and its houses. Its replacement, Troy Via, was quickly built on the ruins, its thin streets and more compact structures testifying to a beleaguered city. Excavations at later Troy are bleaker. Job-buried storage jars testify to people hoarding against siege, thus preparing for potential future requirements. And the final stratum of destruction contains arrowheads, human skeleton, and signs of wholesale burning. The bronze and pottery from this layer of destruction are dated to ca. 1180 BCE, and thus Troy Via is a prime suspect to being the city that may have fallen to Greek spears and fire. Amongst the most intriguing evidence for a historical basis to the Trojan War is not located in Greece or even Troy, but in the Hittite Empire's capital of Hattusa. Cuneiform inscribed tablets on clay mention a city called Wailusa, a verbatim Hittite designation for Ilios, the second name of Troy. These diplomatic documents reveal Wailusa as a significant Hittite vassal state worth royal attention and military aid. Even more intriguing are references to a people known as the Ahiyawa, who are equated by many scholars today with Homer's Achaeans, the name he uses for the Greeks. The tablets speak of Io-Hittite vassal fights in northwestern Anatolia, a scene of Greek settlers and raiders pressing against Hittite-held territory in exactly that region of the world where Troy existed. One particularly intriguing document speaks of an Ahiawan commander by the name of Tawagalawa, whose name is surprisingly similar to that of Eteocles, one of the figures out of Greek heroic tradition. While these tablets do not tell of a siege lasting 10 years or the face of Helen that set ships adrift by the thousand, they do tell of Mycenaean Hittite conflicts in the Troad region at exactly the period when Homer's war was conjectured to have occurred. The collapse of Troy Via circa 1180 BCE occurred at one of history's saddest moments, the collapse of the world of the Late Bronze Age. The magnificent Eastern Mediterranean cultures disintegrated in a half-century like sandcastles in front of a wave. The Mycenaean palaces in Greece were incinerated and abandoned, the Linear B accounts containing final, desperate pleas for bronze and warriors. The Hittite Empire dissolved overnight, its capitals destroyed by unknown enemies. Egypt clung to existence by narrow margins of invasion from mysterious sea peoples, while Cyprus and the Levant coast underwent cycles of destruction. On this point, the fall of Troy fails to appear as a standalone event, but as part of a systemic collapse that rearranged the old world. Others have suggested that the destruction of Troy was not caused by a unified Greek force determined to reclaim a plundered queen, but rather by groups of roving warriors and starving refugees among the great waves of migration at the end of the Bronze Age. The mythical wooden horse might represent not cunning strategy, but the rather mundane truth that the walls of Troy, as sturdy as they were helpless against the chaos engulfing the ancient world. Throughout the centuries after the sack of Troy, when the Bronze Age palaces were crumbling and the scripts had been lost, the best of the past was remembered only in the brains of wandering bards. These itinerant poets from court to court around the Greek world carried with them songs of old heroes, divine aid, and cities that had descended into myth. Memory itself, however, was a creative agency. Every new telling of the story added new things, heightened dramatic passages, and inserted different traditions into richer and more multifaceted accounts. What was initially a historical conflict between Greeks and Trojans, maybe a months-long skirmish and not a year-long epic, gradually turned over the course of time into a divine siege of gods and heroes. Real Bronze Age kings were made into demigods, bronze weapons turned into magical wands forged by deities, and a meticulously executed warfare expedition turned into a divine conflict between fate and man's vanity. The Helen who may have existed, potentially a Mycenaean princess whose marriage alliance collapsed, was immortalized as the world's most beautiful woman, her visage accountable for history's most devastating war. By this heroic explication, Troy itself became progressively lost beneath the cumulative layers of mythic interpretation, so that it became almost impossible for later generations to untangle truth and legend. Historians today approach the matter of Troy with advanced tools and cautious method, recognizing that the truth must reside somewhere between Homer's godly epic and absolute disbelief. The archaeological record generally supports the fact that there was a significant Greek invasion of Troy around 1180 BCE, but it would likely have been a far smaller affair than Homer describes. It might have been a Mycenaean raid by troops seeking loot and slaves, or a fight for trading rights and local power. The myth of the wooden horse, if it existed at all, could easily have been a siege engine, a figurehead from a ship, or just a later poetic invention to explain how invulnerable walls were breached at last. The 10-year siege most likely compressed multiple conflicts and raids into a single narrative, and the gigantic list of Greek fighters undoubtedly encompasses multiple fighters from different times and places whose deeds got mixed up in the Trojan legend. Nevertheless, despite all its poetic ornamentality, Homer's version maintains astonishing specificity regarding Bronze Age warfare, society, and geography, which means that actual historical memory lies behind the mythological overstructure. Reality about Troy is perhaps less glamorous than in Homer's retelling, but no less fascinating. A snapshot of a vanished world in which Bronze Age kingdoms fought for control along the wine-dark sea, and where the fall of a single city spelled the end of a whole civilization. Standing here today among the wind-scoured ruins of Hisarlik, looking out over the Dardanelles to the blue Greek islands on the horizon, one can feel the weight of 3 millennia pressing down like the weight of time itself. The great stone walls that once protected Troy remain standing, a reminder of hopes and fears of the Bronze Age kings whose names have vanished. Whether or not Achilles ever dragged Hector's body around these walls, whether Paris and Helen ever walked down these boulevards, whether wooden horse ever stood where tourists now throng, these things perhaps are never going to be known. But perhaps that is the way it should be. Troy's peak strength never was as a historical site, but as an emblem of human ambition and human frailty, of civilizations rising and falling like waves upon an infinite ocean. In seeking the ancient Troy, we find something more valuable than archaeological artifacts. We find the boundless human need to make our wars into stories, our tragedies into books, our loss into legend that resounds across the ages. The fall of Troy, whether historical or not, reminds us that our finest achievements are fleeting, but the stories we leave behind them can acquire a kind of immortality that no Bronze Age king could have imagined. What do you think? Was Homer preserving prehistoric memories of a real war, or was he simply the world's greatest tale weaver, weaving myths and legends together into an epic that has captivated humanity for 3 millennia? Let us hear your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this journey behind the secrets of the ancient world, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next time around, we'll explore another legendary civilization and the blurred line between history and myth. Until we meet again, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember that sometimes the greatest truths aren't in that which we can prove, but in that which we simply hold to be true.